I always say the best feeling in London is the marathon because it brings the best of humanity out. On that one day, you're on the train, you're on the tube, people are clapping. You never see it any other time. The things that sit in my wheelhouse is the technology side. So the timing mats and making sure we get the right timing. If someone's going to break a world record, we need to make sure we put the right provisions in place. This is slightly different to where I've worked before because historically, if the date slips, you're okay. You've got something to play with. But when you've got a date that can't slip, then everything needs to make sure it works.
Hello and welcome to CPO Stories, where I take the opportunity to speak to executive product leaders from some of the UK's biggest well-known companies, as well as some of the stars of the future. And on this episode, I'm delighted to welcome Bhavesh Vaghela. Bhavesh has a long and storied career, starting out working in engineering for HP before moving into tech consulting and strategy and product leadership roles at Barclays, TSB, Callsign and Collinson. Finding time to found his own startup on the side before slipping into the hot seat at London Marathon Events, a world-leading mass participation events organiser, getting over 500,000 people off the sofa a year. And I'm presuming his team deliver their work in sprints. Bhavesh, thanks for coming and welcome to the show.
Thank you, Jason. Pleasure to be here.
It's a pleasure to have you here. And I'm very excited to talk to you because you've only just recently joined London Marathon Events as well. So I'm looking forward to getting some kind of hot takes.
3 months in now. So, yeah.
Well, enough to be dangerous, but not enough to be kind of part of the furniture yet, I guess. But let's get into that. But when I told some friends before this that I was interviewing the Chief Product Officer or Chief Product Technology Officer at the London Marathon, as I put it at the time, they were like, what products does the London Marathon even have? But I think it's obviously a bit more complicated than that and the kind of the structure of the organisation and what it is that you're working on. So how would you specifically describe London Marathon Events as an organisation and the mission of the company?
It's a really good question, Jason. So I get asked when I say I work for London Marathon, they say, have you run the marathon? Is the first one. Have you run it? Not yet, is my answer. And what do you do for the rest of the year? Because you've got one marathon to organize and run. So what do you do for the rest of the year? And we've just finished our world-breaking London Marathon, where we had over 56,000 finishers and got a Guinness World Record for it. So London Marathon Events runs multiple events. We have lots of marquee events. We also do white label events as well. So we are in the mass participation market, let's say, but specifically around running and activities. And our core mission is about inspiring activities. So how do we make sure we're inspiring activities, not just for the people who are pure, marathon runners or, really are into their running, but also the people who may not be thinking about running, and how do we inspire them to start running? So we've invested in a number of different things that people may know about: Park Run, Junior Park Run. We've worked through with multiple charities to help enable activities in suburbs. We've recently supporting the NBA for basketball, 3x3 basketball. So it's more than just running, but we still have kind of mass participation at the core. But we look to make sure that we're doing the right thing by inspiring activity. What the benefits of inspiring activity are multiple. It's almost like throwing a stone in the pond and getting multiple ripples. People who are less active tend to have, tend not to have, that kind of lifestyle. That's a healthy lifestyle. So by just making someone have a little bit more activity in their life, it helps them, and there's multiple benefits from a mental health perspective, a wellness perspective, and a kind of a person's perspective and their outlook in life from a discipline perspective, and a training to do something and having something to really look forward to. So lots of benefits from just training or running or participating in an event, from a community coming together. I always say the best feeling in London is the marathon, because it brings the best of humanity out. On that one day, you're on the train, you're on the tube, people are clapping, people are saying hello. You never see it any other time. It's the only time where
definitely not in London.
Not in London, for sure. And so it's the only time where people are really friendly and open and wanting to talk to each other because they've just participated either as spectators or runners in this, huge, amazing, iconic event within London. So we have a number of different products, to come to your question. So there's lots of products, and I classify most things as products. So if I think about, we have an app, an event day app. We have event day apps for all our different events that we have. We run the website. There's the whole ticketing. and getting access to the London Marathon. There's the whole allocation of bibs, and making sure that we get the right wave time. All these things that I never knew existed or had to be considered now are things that I'm aware of and acutely aware of because they all sit within my area. So lots of different products that we look at, and the idea is if we think about the customer's experience, is how do we seamlessly make sure that the customer who's applied and got into the marathon is able to then work through that life cycle of training, the kind of, making sure they have all the right support, making sure that then they have all the right instructions, all the way through to the event, how people can follow them in the event and understand where they are, where they're running, what their times are, all the way through to kind of, post running recovery type thing. So that's the customer life cycle, and we look to help with different products throughout that life cycle.
Now, I have run the marathon myself a couple of
Oh,
times when I
congratulations.
was,
Well done.
well, thank you very much, when I was younger. So, like, I probably wouldn't do it now, but, definitely can kind of speak to that kind of, there's nothing quite like it, just like, and especially in your kind of your home city as well. But I also know that the marathon itself, like, especially marathon day, is just, I mean, it's just such a huge event, such a big undertaking, so much that I just assume is like a logistical nightmare. And that's all in your camp as well, isn't it? So, like, this isn't just a technical platform that you're building, like a SaaS platform that you're kind of, just putting a little box on its own. This is something that has deep links into the real world and all of that kind of race day organization and all the stuff around it. Does
Yeah.
that make for a very different kind of challenge, maybe to some of the challenges that you're working on previously in your career?
Yeah, so just the things that sit in my wheelhouse is the technology side. So the timing mets and making sure we get the right timing, especially for when the elites are running, because that's super important to make sure we have the right times for if someone's going to break a world record, we need to make sure we put the right provisions in place to get the right timing for each of the runners, the connectivity, the Wi-Fi, the making sure that we have tower, Tower Bridge has really bad connections, so make sure we have a fixed line in there that allows us to be able to transmit that data, feeding into all the broadcasts. So that whole kind of that whole technology piece kind of sits in my warehouse. So why is that different to what I'm used to? Historically, dates can slip. You can't really slip on the marathon. You talked about the logistics. We've got wider teams that look after closing down London, basically, or central London for a day. And so there's a number of different logistical things and approvals and agreements that need to happen that the kind of the events team set out. And this is slightly different to where I've worked before because historically, if the date slips, you're okay. You've got something to play with. But when you've got a date that can't slip, then everything needs to make sure it works. So whatever we do from a technology perspective has to have at least a month of testing before we get into the marathon to make sure it all works. We have all that prep to put the technology in needs to be done within, one day London is awake, the next day, London is closed down for the marathon. So you have a very small time window to make sure everything gets landed, everything works from a technology perspective. So yeah, very different to what I'm used to, but again, really enjoyable because it's a different sort of pressure.
Yeah, I was going to say, but the pressure isn't so much. I mean, yeah, obviously you have all of those things that you just mentioned, but there's the kind of the pressure, like you say, like with the world record runners and the kind of the eyes of the world are on you and on your, not specifically on you, but like on your organization and on the work that you've done. So it kind of feels like the ultimate, like, oh my God, we got to get this right. Like if it went wrong, it would be just a disaster, right? Like, does that
Yep.
put a certain type of pressure on you and your colleagues and does that manifest itself, I guess? Or is it something that's just, kind of all kind of just kind of keep on trucking because that's just what you signed up for?
I think if I look at the wider organization, I'm 3 months in, but we've got some people that have been there for 20 years, 30 years, have done this, for 30 years. London Marathon hit 45 years this time. So there's a lot of tacit knowledge and connections wider that it becomes just the norm. So yes, it's heavy in terms of, the effort and all the planning that goes in. But at the same time, there is that confidence that we know it's going to work. because there's that knowledge and that pedigree and that understanding of how things work and, what needs to be done if there is a problem. And there's always problems, right? But what do we need to do? And, we had a really hot marathon this time in terms of the temperature and the weather. So, the provisions of the ice baths and the medical provisions were all just ramped up. The number, the mathematics that goes into it, and I can't really speak so much into it because I'm not an expert, but the mathematics that goes into it to understand how many water bottles we need, how much ice we need per person, what the medical provisionings need to be, how many more medical professionals do we need, because heat plays a significant role in how people then perform in the marathon. All that then takes into account. And so because of the pedigree, and I'm very privileged to be working at London Marathon, the knowledge, the tacit knowledge is hard, but it feels like it's all doable. And there is a real kind of uplifting spirit as people run into the marathon, pardon the pun, and actually start working working through the marathon weekend. And it's a big sigh of relief at the end of it. But again, there's a real jubilation as we go through it.
I was going to say there's obviously a seasonality aspect to this, and the marathon itself is once a year, but it's not just the marathon, is it? Because you've got all these other events that you do as well. So, like, I could naively sit there and think, oh well, Bavish and the team are going to get 3/4 of the year off, and they're going to be fine, and then it's just that bit of effort towards the end or the beginning of the year. But you've kind of got a constant schedule. So does that mean that? I mean, obviously you're always going to be busy, but is there kind of a limit to the number of big kind of marathon-ish scale events that you can put on? Like, does that have to kind of come, is it like a heartbeat of big events and then lots of smaller events? Or do you sometimes have other crunch times throughout the year where you're like, actually, yeah, we've got 3 or 4 big things and we've got to kind of put everything in to get those over the line?
So I think there's always going to be crunch points, but you're right around seasonality. So coming into August and summer, it's a bit more of a quiet period. So we're doing a more strategic work, and then ramp up to our big half in September. And again, it's then a ramp up back into the season or the autumn season to cover them. So there is an ebb and flow in terms of seasonality, but given how many events that we put on, um, there isn't a kind of, a point where we can all just do nothing. There's always something that needs to be done. Be it, simple things like making sure that we have the robustness in our reporting and data platform, through to making sure that we have the next race app ready for the next, the race that's happening, and all the testing that needs to be done behind there. So lots of things are continuously in that kind of cycle, let's say, to make sure that we're ready.
But I'm going to go out on a limb here, and as someone that's run the marathon, but also run a bunch of other runs over my fairly mediocre running career, but I still did it where I could. But I'm going to say that the kind of the I don't know, the pros, my side of things, as the runner, the person that has to sign up and pay and get the pack, and then obviously it's training, but then race day logistics for me, and a lot of that seems to stayed fairly the same over the years. There's not been, as far as I can tell, many I don't know, enhancements that are kind of game changers for me. Like the main principles of running are kind of the same. Yes, like I say, you sign up, you train, you turn up, you put your thing on your shoe, you do the run, and then you get your results, and then you cheer afterwards. But of course, I'm assuming that you're going to tell me that there have been quite a lot of advancements, that maybe some of them not 100% visible to me, or maybe some of them are kind of in areas that are kind of back office versus front office, or to kind of support those logistics. Like, what does innovation look like, I guess, is where I'm coming to in the kind of the context of race and event organizing.
So there's always the things that you don't see. So how do we put on more events without increasing the size of the organization by, if you've got a direct correlation between events and number of people, you'll never be in it's not a sustainable way. So every event you put on, you need X number of people. So there's lots of innovations in that. How do we standardize and scale our operations on that side? From a technology perspective, there's a lot of basic, brilliant basics, let's say, that have now been put in place. And me coming in feels like the right time to then start driving some of them innovations from a technology perspective and a digital product perspective. So you'll see a lot more of them things coming through. But you're right, the fundamental principles in terms of the entry, the training, the event, the post recovery, them cycles are not going to change. However, the method of how you interact with that, we see that changing a lot, especially with people moving more into digital. Lots of innovation happening in the digital space, from immersive maps through to the use of AI. Hey, we've been how many minutes in, and no one's used the word AI, so that's a good one. So, but I'll use it now. So I've broken that law. So yeah, even just the use of AI is going to become very beneficial for that connected ecosystem for the runner, but also for the spectators as well. Because if we think about London as a whole, and just use the London Marathon as an example, because it's our biggest event, that connective experience between loved one and person taking part, the participant. There's so much innovation that can be put in that place. So there's lots of things on the horizon. So watch your space.
Oh, I'm excited. It's funny, actually. I was looking at a startup pitch recently from a company using like AI vision to kind of map the real time movements of sports people, and getting all the stats off of that and stuff. So I'm assuming that sort of thing is very much kind of in your mind as well, as you start to move beyond maybe just the AI that everyone's using, which the LLMs and everything, and actually start to move into some of the ways that you can use AI to kind of track and enhance performance as well, right?
Exactly, exactly. It's almost like having your own running concierge, or your running
Mm.
companion. And how do we make sure that we can help inspire activity? That's always our core. So how do we, from a technology and product perspective, continue to inspire activity, but start looking at how we do that wider than kind of just our normal segment, and looking at wider to inspire more activity, which again has a net benefit from a health perspective, and then a net benefit from a societal perspective as well.
No, I mean, sounds super interesting, and I'll keep putting my name into the ballot just in case I get to take advantage of any of it at any point. But how does product management look at the London Marathon events? I mean, obviously you've not been in the seat for too long, so I'm assuming that maybe it's kind of looks like it did before you got there, and maybe you're on a transformation journey, or maybe it was already fine. But like, how does product management look like, and kind of how are the teams organized? How many people do you have? Like, what's the product org look like?
So we have my role covers lots of different things. So from core technologies, platforms, all the way through to products and digital products. So I would say that the product team are on a journey. There's a lot of amazing talent, lots of runners, believe it or not. So lots of people with real strong domain knowledge, and really understand what it takes to run a marathon, what it takes to participate in these events, which gives us I guess it gives us the edge on really understanding, not just assuming what the customers think, but helping understand what the customers go through in that journey. So I've got a really strong team from that aspect. We're still on that journey. Um, Typically, right now we have owners of channels, so web, mobile, overall kind of entry systems. So we have owners of channels, and that's going to change over time. But there's the journey that we need to go on for sure.
And how big is that organization? Like, just to get an idea of the scale.
Between 20 and 25 people. So it's not
Okay.
we're not a huge organization as a whole. London Marathon Events isn't a huge organization. The group isn't huge. We do a lot with what we have, and that frugality comes through. I think frugality for me is a blessing. I worked in banking before, and sometimes some of the innovation projects, it would have been easier just to pile money on a table and burn it, because at least you'd get some heat. Then some of the innovation shiny toy innovation projects that said exec thought would be a good idea, and they invest millions into it to try it out. So to keep people busy. So having that frugality, having that mission of inspiring activities, having the mission to support our foundation, which then also gives grants out to charities that then inspire more activities, really helps us stay lean, but also really focused on the outcomes we want to do.
But that's interesting about, for want of a better word, the kind of subject matter expertise. Like you say, you've got a bunch of PMs that are runners, or presumably of all different levels of running ability, like the rest of the world. But at the same time, if they've done it, maybe they've done marathon, or they've done half marathons, or they've done whatever it is that they've done, and they've got that kind of deep domain expertise. But there's some kind of balance between like having that domain expertise and to some extent being able to rely on that domain expertise, and also maybe kind of going too far and starting to forget your actual customer, which I guess in the case of the London Marathon, they could also be the customer, but at the same time, there are lots of other actual customers. So how
Yeah.
do you try to push to make sure that you're getting the best of the kind of the subject matter expertise, the domain expertise, but not forgetting the fact that there are actually other people out there that might be a little bit different?
So I always start with the first principle that I know nothing, irrelevant of how much years of experience I have, irrelevant of my domain expertise. Starting with the whole curious mindset really helps. Starting with, I interview so many more people than I ever have before, because you'll always find randomly you'll be sat on a train and you'll talk to someone and you say you work for London Marathon. They say they've applied for the ballot. Can they get a free ticket from me? It's typically the conversation that goes, there is no cheat code, so I'm not able to give tickets out. So there is no cheat code. Best of luck to the people on the ballot. But again, when I talk through that journey and have that conversation, there's always really key insights that I get from just talking to people. And so for me, having that from a product person or a product professional, you should always respect the fact that there's knowledge, always more knowledge to acquire. So I kind of akin it to, there's so many AI experts out there right now, and they've read a book, done a course, and now they're an AI expert. I'd call myself an alchemist, never an expert, because it's always so much more. And at the pace at which AI is going, there's always so much more to learn. So I'm that curious mindset of being able to play and understand and see what other signals we get. And that's the kind of culture I'm breeding within my area, to have that curious mindset. So just because it is today doesn't mean it needs to be the same for tomorrow. Just because, we think it's the right thing to do, we need to make sure we validate it with the right customer base as well. Because the worst thing you can do as a product person is build a shiny new toy and Field of Dreams, if you're old enough to remember that movie. Um, and then no one comes. And then you're scratching your head going, huh? But we thought this was a really cool idea. And the best way to really help with that is that product sensing. And the only way to get product sensing is really to be talking to customers as regular as possible to understand signal. And you'll get noise as well. But if you talk to more and more people, you start getting clusters of signal where you go, actually, this is a real thing that we need to then go after and solve.
Must be quite easy though, again, especially in London or at least in the UK, and speaking to people about the London Marathon. It's like it's not hard to find people that are going to get excited about that as well, right? Like it's not like you're running some niche B2B app that's got like a really sort of narrow user base. Like everyone has heard of it. A lot of people have tried to do it. Some people have done it. So I
Yeah.
guess you get a lot of passion from the people, and you probably find it quite easy to just go out and find people. So
Yeah.
does that make it easier or harder in the sense that like everyone's going to have an opinion? Everyone's, it's like you're not in a situation where like you're going to be kind of short of input or feedback. So like, how do you actually even manage to sort through that and actually end up kind of coming out with something coherent?
And you're absolutely right. It's almost like football, where everyone's, even if they don't play football, they're going to be giving advice on what the coach should have been doing, or how the positioning of the players should be, even if they've never done it themselves. And it's very similar, where people have a lot of opinions. Either they've participated or they're runners, and they've gone, "This is what you should do," and really, that whole product skill in the product sensing is about making sure that you can really start. There's a lot of noise, always a lot of noise. Doesn't matter what industry you're in, you're always going to find noise. But it's about really trying to find the signal and then thinking through what experiments can we run to validate that signal. So there's a saying I heard recently, and I think it was a Jeff Bezos saying. who said something around, I'm going to paraphrase it because I can't quote it off the top of my head, but he talked about experiments being cheap. They only get expensive when they become real, when you try and productionize them. And I think that's quite a profound saying, and I truly believe it. The way that the more people you talk to, the more clustering of signals you'll get. And then off the back of that, you've got some hypotheses you need to prove. And a lot of this now, especially with, the I don't know if you've used Lovable or Bolt or, these prompt prototype tools. I won't call them, they're marketed as you can build a whole product and go live with them. To get something that's scalable and hardened is much harder than just hitting a few prompts. It'll get there one day, I'm sure. But even just using things like that and using user testing software, you can really start validating some of the signals and seeing, is it a real strong signal? Is it a weak signal, or have we not hit the mark? And a lot of that won't take investment. It will just take some time of someone just to work through that. So I'm very much around making sure we do as many experiments as we can before we start building anything to just validate it. But sometimes, people just use data. There is a gut feel, which I call this product sense. You got to know, right? You feel it and you go, actually, this is something I'm going to back, and we'll amend parts of it if it doesn't work. But again, it's something that then you want to back and then push forward with. And also being humble and saying it's harder sometimes to deprioritize things. Prioritizing, uh, 10 things might be easier, but to deprioritize one of them might be harder. So it's also about saying, okay, this is now, the signals are telling us that this doesn't work. Therefore, this one goes back into the backlog or gets put on the archive shelf with lessons learned, and we move on to something else. And that kind of continuous mindset of making sure that you're solving the right issue is super important.
To a product person, yeah, that all sounds perfectly reasonable and not even that controversial, right? Like those are some fairly well-established principles, and obviously it'd be good to see how they play out now that you're kind of in place. But I'm going to also go out on a limb and say that obviously London Marathon events has been around for a while. It's a big, well-established brand, like you say. It's got lots of sporty people that have kind of set the thing up and run with it and worked with it for years. And I'm going to assume that they're not all producty type people. Like there's going to be some different personalities and different mindsets in the company. Maybe some of whom might not be kind of naturally on the same page with regards to things like testing and learning and quick, fast failures, and maybe deprecating features that aren't being used, or doing some of the pivots that you were talking about. So, how do you see your role, or how have you managed to kind of advocate for some of those things potentially in the face of dubious responses? Like, do you have dubious responses, or is everyone already on the same page, or have you had to sort of find creative ways to get people to give you some leeway to try some of these things?
It's a really good question. It's almost like that kind of innovation adoption cycle, right? You've got your kind of, your raving fans or your early adopters. I'm privileged in London Marathon that we've got a lot of entrepreneurs who really want to change things, make things better. If you think about the flight, the more money that the marathon makes, the more money that goes into charities, the more positive that does. We did 75 million in one day and got a Guinness World Record this year for the London Marathon for charities. So that's the core purpose, where people are really pushing to do the right thing for a charity, so that we're able to then raise a lot more money for charities, and then they go on to do, countless invaluable work for the community. So that's kind of the purpose that everyone aligns around. A lot of people are very purpose driven at London Marathon, and so that kind of concept of having to bring people on the journey or legacy thinking is not really here that I've seen. It's been going for 45 years. 1981 was the first marathon, and it still feels it reinvents itself each and every time. New things come on, reinvents itself. Real strong ambition, very ambitious. And I think that comes from the whole running community and competition and that ambition and discipline. So for me, I don't see that in this organization. Historic organizations I've worked with, especially banks, they have a lot of legacy systems and complex legacy systems, and
Oh yeah.
do you put a veneer on there and add some APIs and then make it look like it's something different? Here it's very different. Here we have, there's been a lot of investment in the base technology, so we've got real strong base technology. Now it's about utilizing that and really making a distinctive difference in the experience of participants, spectators, charities, everything under our kind of customer base. And that's what I'm really excited about.
Again, sounds positive and, may I even say, inspiring. But you're the CPTO there as well. So you've kind of got two hats that you wear at the same time. And there's obviously lots of differing opinions about the merits of one role versus two roles. And even if you're pro it, there's still the idea of like, well, you've got to balance the two sometimes competing priorities. You've got the product stuff, the kind of the customer facing stuff. You've got the tech stuff, which isn't always customer facing. So I guess the simple question is like, how do you balance between those two sides? Or to some extent, do you even consider them two sides? Or is everything so closely sort of locked together in your organization?
If you asked me maybe 5 years ago, I would have said you need to. Because just sheer amount of work that needs to be done in the technology space as well as the product space, you needed to. And in some organizations too is also needed, right? Someone who's going to be managing the product and she is going to be helping with revenue and growth and everything under that kind of side and retention. And then someone who is going to be looking after technology and she could be making sure that, this cybersecurity is safe and your posture is safe and things. I think the organization London Marathon is small enough that it can be one role. I always say this too, and I was mentoring a CEO recently, and I said, if your product person and your technology person are not aligned at that C level, if you have a chief product person, a chief technology officer, and they're not aligned, all you're going to get is finger pointing. All you're going to get is, hey, the requirements weren't, done properly. And the technology person will be saying, the product person was saying, technology doesn't work. And they just point at each other all the time. And so having a
Yep.
role, and that's why I see a lot more organizations going to a more singular role because it just means that it's all under one wheelhouse. It's all under one organization. In terms of priority, I don't see there being a conflict. We need to do things that work. They do it at a safe, so make sure that it's done from a strong security posture. Also, make sure it's scalable, and also make sure it's solving a real problem. And having it in one area means that you can really think about how you build out your platform as thin slices of the pyramid instead of trying to bake historically, you got two different competing teams. Let's say one wants to build the best platform known to man or known to person, and the other person is trying to build the best product. Sometimes they're not aligned. So you end up with this platform that's brilliant. We use 10% of that platform and you spend 20 million on it. And then the product person wants to do something slightly different, which the platform can't do. So there's more investment in the platform. And so you end up with these competing friction points. So that alignment needs to be there. So for me, being privileged enough to have both roles really helps because I know what the platform needs to do. I also know what the product needs to do. And then finding that balance becomes uh, almost a priority type exercise. But some of it's first principles. Security is it's a non-negotiable. So we need to make sure that's safe. I don't want to be on the newspapers. I don't think anyone does, right? Given what's happened with Marks and Spencers and some of the cybersecurity issues that we've seen recently. So again, we need to do it in that way. And having one person and that single threaded leader just means that then there is that key balance. And then ultimate decision isn't a dance off between, favors that need to be traded because the technology person needs a favor from the product person and vice versa to try and get an alignment, which tends to be how, things typically get prioritized, right, at the C level. So I think it means that you can move at pace, and then you can really help focus the things we go after.
Well, I'm sold. But you talked obviously a little bit about leadership there as well, and obviously, you've come in and you're leading those two things forward. And you've also kind of described the fact that you're kind of on a bit of a journey. You've come in, you've obviously by now you've surveyed the surroundings, you've probably identified some areas that you want to change or improve or keep the same depending on the areas. But when it comes to like the end of that journey, if that journey even ever has an end, but like in maybe the short term, like a milestone that you're aiming for, like are you looking to try and get to, I don't know, some kind of utopian dream of product where everything works exactly the same as one of the books? Or do you feel that there are sort of certain principles that maybe you like to stick to, but actually the details are kind of flexible? Like what is your vision, I guess, for highly effective product management teams?
So I think, and then Martin Kagan says this as well. His books are a framework, but your context has to be, And I come across a lot of people who say, "Well, in the book it says we need to do it this way, but to do it that way doesn't work. So why are we doing it that way, right?" So you really need to take context of the organization in place. So my vision is to really drive product led thinking, drive discovery through kind of signals and talking to customers, but at the same time making sure that we've got some key deadlines that need to be met, right? So making sure that the context of what we're doing fits within the organization. My utopia is around, they always think about, there's always going to be this utopia where everything runs and all you're doing is walking around and adding a little bit of oil and everything works. It's never the case because there is so much change happens external to the organization, external to my organization, that you are continuously having to evolve. So I don't think, in product, if you stop or just stand still, you're going backwards because everything's moving forwards, right? And it's the same thing here. So I don't ever think there will be a homeostasis moment where we're all, everything is level, but really making sure that we can maximize maximize our efforts, focus on the right things, and really deliver. You know, it sounds like a bit of um, a fluffy word, but really deliver impactful change. But like release value often is some of the core principles that I want to make sure that we work towards. And we've got all the right constructs, the right behaviors to make that happen.
But you kind of touched on it. There's this idea that occasionally you're going to run into a PM who maybe is a bit more idealist and again starts to quote little bits of book and start to complain maybe even that they're not getting to do some of the things. And maybe that's not the case here. Maybe it has been the case in some of your previous leadership roles. But have you ever found like a good way to be kind of inspirationally aspirational, if we can even use that phrase, to try and give people an idea that they're you're going to do the best that you can, but also at the same time, kind of bedding in that realism and contextual pragmatism that maybe you're not going to get to do all of the things, but you are going to get to do some of the things.
Absolutely. So probably wider than just where I'm working right now with London Marathon. But what I tend to do is where it's where it's safe to fail. Why don't you try it out and see what happens? And that allows them to try it out, take ownership. It's their ownership to do it. If they wanted to do a different way of doing discovery that may not work in the context of the organization, try it out, see what happens. And usually, 99% of the time, they'll come back and say it didn't work. And at that point, it's not about I told you so. It's about, okay, well, let's understand why it didn't work, and that gives them the realization of the constraints of the organization. So, I was talking to someone recently about the problems to solve. And you hear this all the time from product people. You have this big discussion, and then someone comes up with, well, what's the problem we're trying to solve? Again, I get it. We want to make sure we understand the root problem. But just that language can be quite clumsy if you keep saying it again and again. People will start thinking, well, why are we talking about problems? I really need this thing to be done. And so having the right pragmatism to say, okay, well, what's the solution? And they could come up with a solution. Why is that solution super important? Why does it need to be done this way? What's important about, asking in a different way can really help understand, what the core needs are. Then going back to, well, what's the problem we're trying to solve? So sometimes you see people use references of books, and the core principles are right. You really want to make sure you understand the root problem before you build out a solution, because otherwise you might hit the target. But it's not as simple as just saying, well, tell me the problem to be solved. And someone says, the problem to be solved should be X, Y, and Z. And they go, okay, we will solve it 1, 2, 3. It's not as easy as that. It's not a linear process. So really having that, having that understanding and almost the whirlwinds to go, actually, it won't work like this in this context, or even trying it, but trying it as a pilot is always a good way to really allow learning within the organization, but also learning with individuals. And really, sometimes people, it's like my kids, sometimes they have to fail to learn. They can't just, I can't be there all the time saying, no, do it this way and do it this way. Otherwise, they'll never feel the feeling of failure, which is really important, but also for them to learn. So it's the same thing within kind of my leadership style. If it's safe to fail, then we'll have the discussion. They're really passionate about it and it's safe to fail, then they can try it as a pilot and then see what happens. The worst thing is that then the pilot becomes a real thing and it becomes, grows arms and legs and then becomes part of the process. So you have to just be mindful it doesn't get adopted, a crap process adopted everywhere is still a crap process, right? So got to kind of think that through as well.
No, absolutely. And I think it just speaks to kind of trying to be as open-minded as possible and doing what needs to be done to kind of get to the ultimate goal, which is, as you say, kind of delivering impact as, whether we consider that a cliche or not.
Yeah.
Right. I'm going to finish off with a few lightning questions just to kind of, give people a little bit of sense about you and, maybe even help your team understand a little about, the man behind the man. So the first question I always like to ask in this sort of situation is the best piece of career advice that you've ever received?
So mine would be, I've had lots of good career advice, but putting me on the spot, I'd say perception is reality. Was probably something that I came across maybe 15 years ago, and it was all around personal branding. And what I mean by perception is not about, it's not about jazz hands. It's not about having it's not about like, hey, look at this. It's not about trying to drive that excitement and likability. It's that perception of consistency and perception of actually progress. So perception is reality, and reality is the progress you do. So making sure you're consistent and delivering progress. When I say delivering progress, it's not just doing things. It's about, there's a lot that goes into delivering progress. You need to understand what you're working on. You need to understand what's the key things that need to be pulled to make it happen. Make sure it gets delivered in a safe way, returning the value for the organizer. There's lots of things in terms of progress. And by doing that, that drives progress. And that progress then becomes the perception, which is the reality. So perception is reality and your personal brand is really, really key.
Well, there's a lot of people out there doing jazz hands these days, and I hope not to be seen as one of them. But again, I think
But
again,
you see
making
it with
progress.
like you'll see it with if you land a um you know I've seen it in other organizations where they land a new CMO and the first thing they do is say we're going to do a rebrand, jazz hands, and that's a year and a half. That's a year and a half with agencies to talk about, how the brand makes you feel and what you think about, is the full stop or is it the comma? And that's like a year's worth of work, and millions of pounds, right?
Yep.
And that's a year's worth of work for the CMO to do some stuff, that doesn't really change anything, right? But it's jazz hands. It drives some sort of busyness, and busyness is in progress.
Absolutely. Okay. First app you check in the morning.
Cool. First app I check in the morning. It's changed recently. BBC News is probably the first one I tend to check. But now it's Harvard Business Review. So yeah,
You're up in your game.
I'm up in my game. So Harvard Business Review, BBC, and LinkedIn. They're probably the three that I typically look at.
Oh dear, that's a sad time when you're checking LinkedIn as one of your top three, right?
I
Um,
know exactly.
Most important trait in a product manager.
Curious mind. So someone who has accomplished a lot, however, is humble enough and has a curious mind to learn more. So, it comes through in interviews as well. You've got a fixed mindset. You think that's the way that the world works. And sometimes you're right, but it's not always the case, right? And having that kind of curious growth mindset is super key. The skills can be learned. There's lots of training courses out there, on the job experience around how to be product managers, talking to real customers, failing at whatever you do. There's lots of learnings that way. But if your mindset isn't right, then it takes, I'm going to go off on a bit of a tangent. I know it's a lightning round, but if you're working with a genius, but that genius is toxic, that can ruin your whole organization. That can ruin the whole mission. And so even if they're a genius, they can really ruin the organization. So for me, capability is really important, but mindset is probably more important.
No, absolutely, and it's yeah, definitely important to avoid the toxic personalities, no matter how much they apparently bring to the table off their jazz hands. Right, if you could have dinner with any famous figure, alive or dead, who would it be and why?
Mine's always going to go to Nelson Mandela. So, what an amazing human being! His ability, his resilience, his heart to forgive. His first thing he came out of from jail was around forgiveness. That's a mindset that's very rare in a world of chaos. So, being able to sit with someone as great as Nelson Mandela and really understanding his mindset and millions of lessons from one conversation. And if I could take 1 ounce of that and then you know add that to the next generation, that would be that would be my life's ambitions done. So yeah, Nelson Mandela for sure.
Absolutely, obviously inspirational figure and much missed. If you could start your career over, what would you do differently?
Oh, this is a really good one. What would I do differently? I would have changed jobs more in my younger years, I guess.
Mm.
So, I was 9 years at a particular bank, and there was always a promise of a promotion, but I wasn't just quite there yet. So there was, the dangling carrot was always there every year. "Oh, you've not done this, so I'd go and get that done." The next year, "Oh, but you've not done this," and so I would have changed my career a lot more often in my younger age. Um, that's probably one thing, and having that confidence to fail. So when you start your career, you want to do everything right, and I think that limits your ability to grow until you then have the confidence to go, no one's going to die, so let's try it and see what happens, right? And then once you get into that mindset, you see that you exponentially deliver a lot more from a conversation through to a product because you have the right mindset. So change jobs more as youth, but also have that mindset of failure's okay.
Yeah, no, it's one of those things. But I think one of my reflections from sort of maybe, and I spent 19 years at one company earlier. I'm quite old now, so I can do that and also have other jobs. But like, and it felt like for me that it was the beginning and the end that kind of gave me the most benefit, and the middle bit was maybe the bit that was the least beneficial in some ways,
Yeah.
which is interesting because you can't have the end without the middle. But like, so it's kind of this weird patchwork of thoughts there. But yeah, just this idea that in many companies, the psychological safety to actually be able to fail. Like we've all worked for that boss, right? Like we talked about
Yeah.
douchebag in the corner. Like we've all worked for that boss at least one point in our career. So
Yeah.
how do you avoid being that boss, like that one that people remember as being the douchebag in the corner?
You got to keep a check on yourself, right? So you got to make sure that you never fall into that. So not, as for myself, I always think that there's so much more to be done. There's so much more growth for me to have. So I have that growth thinking, and therefore I will always keep a check on myself. I have a number of different coaches to help me externally, but I will always be, self-aware to make sure I don't get into that. I told you so. Why the hell did this happen? That them sort of conversations don't really help the team. I remember working for a company where the number of war rooms we used to have in a week just became like normal meetings. You'd just have a war room meeting that popped in your diary or a SOS meeting that popped in your diary and it just became the norm. And I was like, if this is the norm, then everyone's just in panic mode. So everyone's just there patching and trying to fix today and not thinking about tomorrow. So making sure that I give that right space to my team. Um, Celebrating failure is an interesting one because I know a lot of people talk about it and go, we should celebrate failure. It's really hard to do, especially in the kind of the British culture as well. But really allowing to be okay to fail, and then be giving them the air cover. So I look for leaders who give me air cover, right? Hey, this is a bit risky. Can you give me air cover? Yes. Let's go and do something. And I'll do the same for my team. Give them air cover. If it all goes great, it's on them. If it goes to shit, I'll take the bullet, right? Because it was on my watch. And having that kind of ability, and it comes to confidence, having that ability and confidence to do that for your team Just means your team will run through walls for you.
No, absolutely. Well, speaking of your team, why should people work for London Marathon events?
Such a beautiful organization. Beautiful is the only word I can come up with, but it's a very progressive thinking organization. But the amount of good it does is countless. It's amazing. The stories you hear, just seeing people crossing the finishing line, the emotions are contagious. But the amount of good it does for society, that alone is a reason to join. But the other things also that kind of the purpose and the pull is there's so much opportunity. So much opportunity. Running is really, really sexy right now. Lots more people doing running. It's mass participation events are seeing a huge growth everywhere you look. You've got lots of even people like Tinder and Bumble and all these dating apps are trying to get in on the running wave. And so there is a wave in that kind of societal thinking, especially in the UK and also in America and in Europe, where people want to be more active, and being on that wave, there's lots of opportunities. So lots of things that we haven't even discovered yet that will become a reality in the next 3 to 6 months. And that's really exciting for me because it's not, I worked in a company once where we ended up polishing the fonts because that's all we had left to do. There's always more to do, but it's such a
Dark mode.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, let's add dark mode and let's change some of the fonts. Um, when you get to that point, you're not going to do any more learning, right? There's and that might be okay. That's that's maybe the focus is we have a strong product now. We're going to hold that product for now and invest in something else, and that might be what needs to happen. For London Marathon, really exciting because there's so much we can do in the product space. So much, like I said, the wave, the market trends are all pointing in the right direction. And it's our opportunity now to make that difference.
Well, there you go. Beautifully summed up. Where can people find you after this if they want to connect up or maybe find out more about the London Marathon events and all of the things that you're doing?
So, like I said, second or third app I open is LinkedIn. So LinkedIn is probably the best way to connect. So if you add me onto LinkedIn, more than happy to answer questions and have conversations.
Well, absolutely. Well, hopefully some people run in your direction and come and do that. But no, I mean, that's obviously been a super inspirational chat. Makes me want to go and go for a run right now. But all I can do for now is thank you very much for spending the time, sharing your story, and wish you the best for the upcoming journey that you're going on.
Thank you, Jason. It's been really fun.